The square root sign is to a power or an exponent, like addition is to subtraction or multiplication to division. They are related, but they are almost opposite. It's the undoing process, if you will. Another name for the square root is, as we see down here, is a radical. After this lesson, you should know how to solve a square root, and you should begin to memorize the perfect squares to make the process, to make doing math move a little more quickly. All right, square root. So we have, this is the square root sign, all right, or the radical sign. This is what we're going to be working on. So here is the most basic radical. It is the square root of 4, and you want to try and make sure your square root signs cover everything that's under it, because again, just like when we did division, parentheses are implied underneath of this radical. The number underneath the radical is known as the radicand. Not super important to know, but it is a good vocabulary word just to understand. And remember, what I was saying about exponents is the square root is the opposite or the undoing of a power. And to show you what I mean is the square root of 4 is equal to 2. So 2 squared, all right, the power of 2 squared square root, that's where they're related, equals 4. So when we look at a square root, we look at the radicand and ask ourselves, well, what squared gives us that answer? And that is the answer for the square root. Moving on, perfect squares. All right, perfect squares can come in handy. All right, perfect squares are numbers that when taking the square root of them, you actually get a whole number. All right, so if we take the square root of 1, we get 1. These are your perfect squares. You don't have to memorize them, but it might really help if you do. The square root of 4 gives us 2, and so on. So as you can see, the square root of 9 would be 3, the square root of 16 would be 4, and I counted all the way up to 20. So if you can memorize these, it just makes one less step that you have to plug into a calculator if you're using a calculator regularly. Again, not a requirement, just helpful. The last thing we're going to work on with radicals today is estimating radicals. Down here we have a slide, and not all radicals are going to be perfect squares. So here I use one that's not. I use the square root of 200. Well, the square root of 200, if you plug it into your calculator, you're going to get a decimal. And so that's a good way to check. But if we're trying to just do something quickly and not plugging it into our calculator, if we want to know the square root of 200 quickly, and we know our perfect squares, we know that 200 falls between 196, which is up here, and 225, which is down here. They're the next closest perfect squares. So 196, 225, so 200 is somewhere in between them. So if we solve the square root of 196, we get 14. And if we solve the square root of 225, we get 15. So we know that the square root of 200 must be somewhere between 14 and 15, probably closer to 14. So if I ask you to estimate the square root of a number, that's how we would do it. So the square root of 200 is approximately 14. That's what this little sign here is. If you have two squiggly lines that are shaped like an equal sign, that means approximately. All right, that means you estimated. Now I'd like for you guys to estimate the next 4 problems below this video. The check your understanding tonight will be more about the order of operations that we did yesterday, but tomorrow's check your understanding will include some problems dealing with these radicals. Thanks guys, see you tomorrow.